A road is a promise that point A always leads to point B, that after every turn there will be another. But in the heart of a summer forest, far from prying eyes, that promise is sometimes broken. What if the map is lying, and the detour you've taken leads to a place that doesn't exist? What if the ringing silence by an abandoned lake isn't peace, but bated expectation? And what if the most piercing horror isn't born from an encounter with a wild beast, but from a simple glance from another person in the car next to you? Today, you will hear 3 such stories. 3 soul-chilling, true stories about what happens when you take the wrong turn. Settle in and prepare to listen. If you dare, of course. Story 1. The Detour. My job has me on the road a lot. I'm a sales representative for a large agrochemical company. I have to travel all over the country and I'm used to it. The road has become a second home to me, with its own rituals, habits, and dangers. I've learned to sleep in noisy motels, eat at gas stations, and entertain myself on multi-hour drives. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. How wrong I was. This happened last summer at the end of July. I was returning from a long and rather exhausting business trip through the southern regions. My last meeting dragged on, and my watch showed it was nearly 10 at night. I had a choice: spend the night in another faceless roadside motel with stale linens or push for home, even if it meant driving all night. The thought of my own bed, my wife, and my daughter outweighed common sense. I hadn't seen my family in 2 weeks, so the choice was obvious. I filled up the tank, bought a thermos of the strongest, most bitter coffee, and a couple of energy drinks for the road, and set off. Part of my route lay along the old federal highway, R118. By day, it's an ordinary highway, but at night, it transforms into something else. The road cuts straight through a huge, almost untouched pine forest, known locally as Chernolesi, the Black Woods. For nearly 150 kilometers, there isn't a single town, not one gas station, just a dense wall of ancient pines on both sides. There's absolutely no cell service here. Cars are incredibly rare, especially after midnight. You drive as if through a black, vibrating tunnel, lit only by the cone of light from your headlights. Your only company is the monotonous drone of the engine and music from the speakers. It was around 2 in the morning. The coffee had stopped working, and I began to feel that dangerous, leaden heaviness in my eyelids. I turned the music up louder, some upbeat rock, and opened the window to let in the cool night air, thick with the smell of pine, damp earth, and something else, tart and wild. Outside, it was absolute velvety darkness, with only the tops of the pines vaguely outlined against the distant, indifferent, starry sky. I had been driving on this desolate stretch for about 40 minutes without seeing a single car in either direction. The feeling of complete cosmic isolation was becoming almost tangible, pressing on my ears. And then, up ahead, an uneven, shimmering orange light emerged from the darkness. As I got closer, I saw the standard setup: a temporary roadwork sign with a reflective arrow pointing to the right, and a few orange cones lazily blocking the highway. An old tractor with its bucket lowered was parked on the shoulder, but not a single worker, not one living soul, was in sight. Great, I thought with annoyance. Just what I needed. Turning back to detour through the nearest city would mean losing 3 hours, at least. The arrow pointed to a barely noticeable turnoff into the forest, a narrow road disappearing into the impenetrable darkness. Apparently, this was the temporary detour. I had no choice. I turned. The asphalt ended immediately, replaced by a packed but bumpy dirt road. The wheels crunched on the gravel. I had to slow down to 20 kilometers per hour. The forest here was different, not like the one along the highway. The trees stood closer together, their lower branches like bony arms, closing in over the road, creating the oppressive feeling that I was driving through some kind of living, overgrown tunnel. My headlights only snatched a small, dusty piece of the road ahead from the gloom, while impenetrable, dense darkness reigned on the sides. It started to feel unnerving. The music playing via Bluetooth from my phone suddenly hissed, choked, and cut out. I looked at the screen. Total loss of signal, which was expected. But why did the music, already downloaded to the memory, stop? I drove on this eerie road for about 10 minutes. It twisted and turned, and I had completely lost my sense of direction. The anxiety, which had been just a faint background noise, began to coalesce into a sticky, cold fear. And then something strange happened. The car's stereo, which had been silent all this time, suddenly turned on by itself. The click of the relay was deafening in the silence. It had caught some frequency. What came out of the speakers wasn't music or voices, but a strange, intermittent white noise, in which I thought I could make out some kind of whisper. I strained to hear, trying to make out the words. It sounded like mumbling, quiet, monotonous, in some unfamiliar guttural language. I pressed the power button several times with force, but the stereo didn't respond. A cold sweat broke out on my back. I floored the gas pedal, making the car jump on the bumps. I wanted only one thing: to get out of there as fast as possible. The road took another sharp turn, and my headlights shone on something that made me freeze and slam on the brakes so hard the tires screeched. Standing right in the middle of the road, about 50 meters from my car, was it. My brain initially refused to believe my eyes. It was a figure. Tall, at least 3 meters, it seemed like a dark void in reality. But its unnaturalness wasn't just in its height. The body was incredibly thin, elongated, as if someone had taken a human silhouette and stretched it upwards on a rack. Long, thin, spider-like arms hung down almost to the ground. The legs were just as long and thin, with knees that bent backward, giving the creature the resemblance of a giant insect. I didn't see a head as such, just a sort of pointed thickening at the end of a thin neck. It stood motionless, just standing in the blinding light of my headlights. I was seized by a primal, animalistic terror, paralyzing and icy. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even breathe. I just stared at this creature and it stared at me, although I couldn't see its eyes. Suddenly, the white noise from the speakers abruptly stopped. In the ensuing dead silence, the creature twitched like a broken marionette and took one slow, unnatural sliding step towards me, dragging its long arms along the dusty ground. That moment snapped me out of my stupor. Out of my mind with fear, I yanked the wheel to the right, driving onto the shoulder and floored it. The car skidded. Branches scraped against the bodywork like claws, but I straightened it out and sped forward, swerving around the figure. As I passed it, I glanced in its direction for a split second. It turned its head and followed me with its gaze. It wasn't a gaze, but a feeling of attention, cold and inhuman. Everything after that was a blur. I wasn't paying attention to the road. I was just flying forward, seeing nothing but the narrow strip of light in front of the hood. I didn't look back. I was terrified of what I might see in the rearview mirror, running after me with its impossible steps. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, I shot back out onto the asphalt of the highway. I didn't try to figure out where I was. I just turned in the direction I was originally heading and drove, not slowing down, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. After about 20 minutes of frantic driving, I saw life-saving lights ahead, a gas station. I swerved into it sharply, braking right at the pump so hard the car almost spun out. Instinctively, I fumbled in my pocket for my phone to call the police, but the screen didn't even flicker. The battery was completely dead. My mind was a total mess. I burst into the gas station building. A young guy behind the counter looked up, startled at my pale, twisted face. I couldn't speak clearly. I was stammering, trying to explain what I had seen. Finally, I asked, "A phone? Let me use a phone, please. Mine's dead." I sat at the gas station until dawn, drinking scalding coffee and trying to pull myself together, still flinching at every little sound. They called me back in the morning. The voice on the phone was calm and boringly businesslike. "Sir, we checked the section of Highway R118 you mentioned. There are no signs for road work there, and none were planned. We didn't find a tractor either. And, sir..." Here, the policeman paused, as if choosing his words. "At the location you indicated, there isn't and never has been any detour road. It's just solid pine forest for dozens of kilometers. Since then, I never take unnamed detours, no matter how official the signs seem. And I'm no longer sure that the only horror you can meet on a night highway is fatigue or a drunk driver." Story 2, The Keeper of the Lake. Last summer, my girlfriend and I decided to take a little romantic road trip. No plans, no hotel bookings, just drive wherever we wanted, stop in beautiful places and sleep in a tent. Freedom. We loaded everything we needed for outdoor life into our old station wagon and headed towards the Karelian Isthmus, famous for its lakes and virgin forests. On the third day, studying an old paper map, we turned off the main highway onto a country road that, apparently, was supposed to lead us to a small, secluded lake called Gluco, or the Desolate. The name didn't bother us. On the contrary, it attracted us. We wanted true solitude, far from noisy tourist spots with their barbecues and loud music. The road was terrible, but our old car crawled forward slowly but surely. After an hour of rattling, when we were already beginning to doubt our path, we finally reached a clearing on the shore of the lake. The place was of an incredible, almost unreal beauty. The lake, like a polished black mirror, lay in a deep bowl of ancient spruce trees. The water was perfectly still, its surface undisturbed by even the slightest ripple. The silence was broken only by the barely audible rustling of leaves and the rare, drawn-out cries of some birds. In the clearing stood a single, lopsided wooden table with benches. Not a soul in sight. We were thrilled, feeling like the first people in this lost paradise. While I was huffing and puffing setting up the tent, my girlfriend went for a walk along the shore. She returned about 15 minutes later, and she wasn't alone. Walking beside her, stepping silently, was a short, stocky old man in a faded canvas jacket and rubber boots. His face was wrinkled like a baked apple, and from under thick gray eyebrows remarkably clear, piercing blue eyes looked out, seeming to see right through you. He lives here, nearby, My girlfriend introduced him. "The keeper of these parts," the old man chuckled, showing a few yellow teeth. His voice was creaky like an unoiled door. "Not often young folks come out this way. The place is quiet, but it has a temper." We started talking. He told us he lived alone in the forest, in a small cabin, hunting and fishing. He spoke slowly, with strange metaphorical turns of phrase that at first just seemed amusing to us. "The lake, you see, it's alive," he said, staring intently at the dark water. "It likes silence, and it doesn't like being watched after sunset. Once the sun is down, hide your eyes from the water. That's when it takes whatever catches its fancy." My girlfriend and I exchanged a slight smirk. We thought he was just a local eccentric, a fan of folklore. We nodded politely, offered him tea, but he refused. "I have to go," he said, getting up. "And you'd be wise to leave before dark. It's no good here at night. The lake gets hungry, and a full lake is a calm lake." With those words, he turned and walked into the forest, disappearing among the trees as quietly as he had appeared. We laughed at his words, writing it all off as elderly quirks. We certainly had no intention of leaving such a paradise. The sun began to set, painting the sky in dramatic crimson tones. We lit a fire, had dinner, enjoying the peace and beauty. But as dusk thickened, the atmosphere subtly but perceptibly changed. The forest fell silent. Completely. First, the birds went quiet. Then, even the annoying mosquitoes and midges vanished. Then the rustling of the leaves also ceased, as if the wind itself was afraid to disturb the peace of this place. An eerie, ringing, vacuum-like silence descended. It started to feel creepy. Maybe the old man was right. My girlfriend laughed nervously, wrapping herself tighter in her blanket. "Should we get out of here?" "Come on," I tried to reassure her, though a chill ran down my own spine. "It's just evening. The acoustics have changed." But we decided to pack up and leave anyway, just to get rid of this oppressive feeling. I got behind the wheel and turned the key in the ignition. The starter clicked, and that was it. Silence. I tried again and again. The car was dead. The battery, which had been perfectly fine an hour ago, showed no signs of life. That's when we got truly scared. We were stranded in a remote forest with no cell service, a dead car, and night was falling fast. The last glimmers of sunset faded. The lake turned completely black, like spilled oil. And then we saw them. At first, I thought it was a trick of the imagination, an optical illusion against the dark trees. On the opposite shore, at the very edge of the water, a figure appeared, then another, and another. It was as if they were rising from the black depths, appearing silently and smoothly. They were silhouettes that looked human, but each had horns on its head, some short and thick, others long and branching. Their limbs were indistinct and blurry, as if shrouded in a dark mist, and it looked like they were levitating slightly above it, not touching the shore. They stood motionless, just standing and looking in our direction. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their collective gaze, cold and hungry, from which my blood ran cold. There were already a dozen of them, and more kept appearing. The fire we had built began to smolder and die out, the flames shrinking as if some invisible force was sucking the life out of it. The silence became so thick it felt like it was pressing on my eardrums. My girlfriend began to cry silently, clinging to my arm. In a panic, I turned the ignition key again and again, Start, you piece of junk! Start!" I whispered like a prayer. At that moment, the figures on the far shore slowly started moving across the lake, directly toward us, gliding over the black water without leaving a ripple. And just then, when I had lost all hope, the engine suddenly roared to life, the car lurched, and it started. I didn't waste a second. Flipping on the headlights, I aimed them at the creatures. They stopped for a moment in the bright light, and I managed to see that their horned silhouettes seemed to be woven from darkness itself, distorting the light around them. I yanked the car around, and we sped away down the bumpy road, not looking back. We never spoke of it again, but I know we both learned a lesson. There are places marked by an ancient evil, and if a local keeper tells you to leave before sunset, you need to listen. Story 3, The Smile in the Mirror. I'm a photographer, not the kind who shoots weddings and corporate events, but the kind people call an urban explorer or stalker. I seek out abandoned places, old factories, deserted villages, forgotten churches, and try to capture their fading beauty, their quiet, melancholic death. It's my hobby, my passion, and one day it nearly cost me my life. I had found information about an abandoned quarry in one of the sparsely populated districts of our region. Judging by old maps and satellite images, a single, almost overgrown road led to it, a perfect location. I gathered my equipment, got into my old SUV, and set off to find it. The road was even worse than I had expected. Overgrown and battered, it wound through hills and groves. But eventually, it led me to my destination. The quarry was magnificent. A huge, man-made canyon with sheer stone walls, at the bottom of which glittered a turquoise, unnaturally bright lake. Not a soul around, only the wind whistling in the cracks of the rocks. I parked my car at the edge of the road so it wouldn't be in the way, and started setting up my equipment. It was late evening, the so-called golden hour, when the light is especially soft and beautiful. I got lost in my work, completely absorbed in the process, the shutter clicking, changing lenses, searching for the perfect angle. At some point, looking up from the viewfinder to change a lens, I felt that sixth sense that sends shivers down your spine, the feeling that I was not alone. I slowly turned and looked around. No one. But then my gaze fell on the road I'd come from. About 200 meters from my SUV, almost hidden behind a bend and some dense bushes, stood another car. An old, dark-colored sedan, a mainline, I think. I was absolutely sure I hadn't seen it when I arrived. It had appeared while I was busy shooting. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't see if anyone was inside. It put me on edge. The place was remote, and the road a dead end. What was another car doing here? I tried to shake off the paranoia, maybe just fellow enthusiasts of abandoned places, or maybe just local fishermen. I continued shooting, but the feeling of anxiety wouldn't leave me. I tried not to look in that direction, but my peripheral vision kept catching little details. It seemed to me that the driver's door opened for a moment and then immediately and silently closed. Then, something glinted in the car's tinted window, like a sunbeam off a lens. Binoculars? Was someone watching me? All the magic of the golden hour vanished. The beautiful, secluded place had become a trap. I was no longer a photographer. I was prey being watched by a predator. I quickly and as quietly as possible began to pack my equipment. Every click of the latch on my camera bag seemed deafening in the sudden silence. I didn't want to show that I was scared and running away. I was just finished with my work. Once packed, I got into my car, started the engine, and slowly drove back. My heart was pounding like a drum. I had to drive past that main line. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to look only ahead. As I drew level with it, I couldn't resist and threw a quick glance towards the driver's seat. A man was sitting behind the wheel. Ordinary looking, about 45, with a short haircut, wearing a plain gray t-shirt. He didn't look like a thug or a maniac. He just sat there and looked at me. And when our eyes met, he did two things that made my blood run cold. He slowly, very slowly, stretched his lips into a wide smile. And then he raised his hand and waved at me like an old friend. There was nothing friendly in that smile or that wave. They conveyed superiority, mockery, and something else, something darker. It was the smile of a hunter telling his prey, "I saw you. I could have taken you at any moment, but today, I'm letting you go. Run." I slammed my foot on the gas. After getting onto a more decent road, I looked in my rearview mirror, and my heart sank. The main line had pulled out behind me. The most terrifying chase of my life began, terrifying in its abnormality. He didn't try to catch me, didn't tailgate me, he just drove behind me, maintaining a constant distance of about 100 meters. He didn't fall behind and he didn't get closer, just hung on my tail like a dark shadow. I sped up, he sped up, I slowed down, he slowed down. I realized he was playing with me. He was showing me that I was completely in his power, savoring my fear. This went on for about 20 minutes. 20 minutes of pure, concentrated, psychological terror. I was already mentally saying my goodbyes when the lights of a village appeared ahead. As soon as I entered the lit street, I looked in the mirror again. The main line was gone. It had simply vanished. It must have turned off at one of the last bends into the darkness, disappearing silently into the night. That incident taught me that the most dangerous predator in the wilderness isn't a wild animal, but a human. And that sometimes the most terrifying thing is not the attack itself, but just the promise of it in a cold, knowing smile.